Armenia's eastern border is dotted with idyllic-looking villages where men, women, and children work, go to school, and play. But these seemingly peaceful communities are forced to live under the constant threat of gunfire coming across the border from neighboring Azerbaijan. The mother and daughter team of Kristin Anahit Cass and Cristina Araxie Cass have documented these resilient Armenians' joys and struggles through Anahit's photographs and the stories in Araxie's new book, Defenders, Stories from Armenia's Border Villages. Can you tell me a little bit about how the book came about?
So it came about as we were traveling through the different villages this summer. We were interviewing people and hearing all of these just amazing stories. And I kept thinking about how I really loved writing fiction and short stories. And I'd actually written a short story about the Armenian genocide before that was received very well by people who read it. And so I was just thinking that I would love to present these stories that I was hearing now in the form of short stories so that it wouldn't just be an account of like, we saw this and we went here, but people would be able to really experience these stories more through the eyes of the people who are actually involved in them. And so then it came almost naturally, because when we would interview people, they would just tell us these stories about their life and about what they were doing and how the conflict had affected them. And so I started writing these stories, which are fictional, but are very, very based in reality and in the people that we actually spoke to.
You had a piece that you were going to share with us. Do you mind reading aloud?
Okay, so this piece is called Diaspora. My great-grandmother fled to Chicago from Kharberd 100 years ago, but not before seeing her father shot, her mother starved to death, and her older sister sold to a Turkish man. She never lived to see Armenia rebuild itself after the Soviet Union, but 100 years after she fled, I came back. Of course, the homeland where she had grown up, in Western Armenia, was lost forever, but I could still come to Eastern Armenia, where we had built the new center of our culture. But when I came, I discovered that the genocide had never really ended. The Turks hadn't managed to kill all of the Armenians, and it seemed that they wouldn't stop until they did. For a century, their allies, the Azeris, had been carrying out ethnic cleansing in Artsakh, and after the Soviet Union collapsed, they had started shooting over the border at Armenia too. And so I found myself in Berd, the nearest city to the border, reporting on the violence against Armenians, just as journalists and missionaries had done in my great-grandmother's homeland 100 years before.
One of the themes that I think came out in that story, as well as in other parts of your book and in your photography, is the power of art and storytelling and spirituality for healing and resilience. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, the people that we met over the times that we've been back and forth to Armenia, especially to the border regions in Tavush, they just have this compelling sense of spirituality and faith and hope and real compassion for the people on the other side of the border. They don't hate the Azeri villagers. They just want peace. They want everyone to be able to live and work together, and they oftentimes express themselves through many different artistic pursuits, right?
And art is such an important part of Armenian culture. There's a great reverence for poets, and music is a part of just so many things. Like one of the people we met was a young boy who was going off to the army, and we went to his sort of send-off party, and so there's a lot of music and dancing and traditional music at those occasions. And there's a lot of songs about like soldiers and boys going off to war, because they use music to sort of, work through these difficult times, and also it's very inspiring and to provide that resilience, and I think the culture is really essential to that.
Can you speak to any other particular stories that stand out to you of someone who is especially resilient?
So the first story in this book is based on actually the first person that we ever interviewed from this region. Is the mayor of one of the small towns, Agipar, which used to be a big industrial town during the Soviet Union, and but now is under fire from Azerbaijan. And he was telling us how he lived in the village for his whole life, and he was actually 12 years old when they first started shooting. And so he remembers like being a little boy and hearing that, and back then it was the actual war was going on, so it was even worse, and they had planes that actually flew over that region. And so but what really inspired us about meeting him, and I think part of what inspired us to go back was that they were so positive, and he was so positive, and he would always tell us like hopeful stories, and he would even make jokes all the time, and he had such a sense of humor even in such a serious situation. And he, like so many of the other people we met, was so hospitable and generous and just nice to us. And it really amazed me, the stories that he was telling about his village and how much, you know, he loves his village and he wants to stay there and stay in his homeland. And that's a very common thing among people. They want to stay even despite the situation.
And do you see a route to peace?
Well, I think it has to do with human rights. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's a very complex situation. I think a lot of the issue is the human rights abuses both between the two countries, obviously shooting over the border, but also within Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is governed by a dictatorship, and so there's not much freedom for the people there. And this is a separate story, but we were talking to somebody in Artsakh, the region that declared independence from Azerbaijan, and it was the founder of an organization for the mothers of wounded soldiers, or of missing soldiers, and she was telling us how she and her organization had connected with a similar organization in Azerbaijan for the mothers of the missing soldiers of the Azeri side, and they had connected to try and figure out what they could find about their sons. And the really just shocking part of the story was that once the woman went back to Azerbaijan to tell the other mothers, look, this is what we found, most of your sons are dead, and you know, to be able to have that acceptance and to be able to have closure in that situation, once she'd gone back and told them that, she was actually imprisoned and reputedly, and she was tortured. And so that's a huge obstacle, because people on both sides, you know, there's a desire to make peace on both sides, and it's not good for either of the, you know, the villages on either side are both in poverty, and you know, they used to live together during the Soviet Union. So I think the issue of defending human rights is very important for a path to peace, because people need to have that freedom to be able to speak and to collaborate and to discuss, you know, ways to make peace and to make it better for everyone. So I think the role of international human rights organizations in this is huge, because, you know, that's what organizations like that exist for, when, you know, politics often fails to protect human rights, but that's essential in getting people to speak to each other and to be able to work out these conflicts. And currently, most of those organizations are not speaking about this issue at all. So I think greater awareness would have to be the first step to peace.
And are there particular organizations that you support?
We've had some really wonderful and extensive support from the Fund for Armenian Relief. We've also had some support from Teach for Armenia. And Teach for Armenia obviously does what it sounds like. They bring world-class education to these villages by bringing teachers in from all over the world. And the Fund for Armenian Relief does lots of work all over Armenia, but especially in the Tavush region. They do economic projects, they do health and human services projects, educational projects, cultural projects, art-related things, so there's lots of things going on there.
And they work with Armenians in the US as well, so helping to sort of connect Armenians and others to help solve this issue.
Great. And is your book benefiting one of those organizations?
Yeah, so all the proceeds from the book, which is being sold on our website, are going to the Fund for Armenian Relief to support their projects in these villages.
Thank you, Anahit and Araxie, for joining us today.
Thank you so much
for having us.
I'm Liz Dunn for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.